I'm Christopher Hein, and today we're going to be talking about Aiki live training and how to do that stuff. So this is the second part of a two-part series. First part we talked about kumiuchi and what that was and how we can start to train that in a live way. And now we're going to talk about Aiki and how to train that in a live way. And with the last video I talked a little more about the word sparring and used the word sparring, which kind of means to struggle. In this we should really not be doing a lot of struggle, at least not physical struggle. So that doesn't mean we're not going to intellectually struggle with the right thing to do at the right time. It just means we're ideally not going to physically struggle with the other person, and that's what Aiki actually is. It's about an energetic exchange and not a physical exchange. So I'm going to call Josh and Maya here, and we're going to talk about the live training that we use in this school to work on the Aiki principles. Josh, Maya? All right, so today we're going to be talking about how to do a live training practice with the Aiki stuff. So what is that stuff and how does it work? So we can't really use the word sparring when we're talking about Aikido, and because the idea is really we don't want to struggle, at least not physically. And so that's another thing we can kind of argue about, whether mental struggle is really struggle, and of course it is on some level, but in Aikido we want to keep everything energetic, and ideally we want to have it energetically work together and not oppose each other. So struggle is the antithesis of what we're trying to do. So we're trying to, ideally, if we were really skilled, we'd be able to figure out a way to always make the energies match that wouldn't be a struggle and everything would come off really well. So when we're talking about that, we can't really use the word sparring anymore. We now have to use the word live training. And live training just means a situation that's live, so all kinds of different variables could happen, and you have to be able to act in the moment and deal with those variables as we go. So remember, in the way we break down Aikido here in the school, we have three major components. One is Tai Sabaki, and that's how you organize your body. So that's any way you make strength or power or force or step or fall down, any of that stuff's all how you personally organize your own body. Then we have Aiki, and Aiki is the ability to energetically interact, and kumiuchi, and that's the ability to struggle. And in Aikido, we don't want to struggle as a means to an end. We want to struggle only to set us back to Aiki. So that's the idea. We only use kumiuchi in a very limited way so we can get back to setting up Aiki, and that's what we're always working towards. All right, so today Maya is going to represent Aiki for us, so we're going to have her doing all the Aiki stuff. And then we're going to go through the basic live drills. All right, so I think the first thing to understand, and one of the most important lessons for an Aikido student, is what range does making Aiki become very, very difficult, right? So understanding that range is super, super important. So we're going to show a really simple drill that I use all the time. I use it in my self-defense classes when I'm talking about just in general to people, what is a dangerous self-defense range and what is an acceptable self-defense range. And also in Aikido, and Aikido is where I actually got all these ideas from. So these are the lessons of Aikido. So we're going to talk about that first. We're going to set up Josh and Maya at a really simple distance. They're going to be at a shoulder touch. Okay, so now you see if Josh sticks out his hand, he could touch Maya's shoulder without moving his body at all, so he can easily touch her shoulder. All right, now from this, it's going to be real simple. All Josh is going to try to do is touch Maya's shoulder. That's it. He's trying to touch her shoulder. Now understand, if he could touch her shoulder like that, that means he could hit her in the face, he could cut her with a knife, he could anything. All you got to do is move his arm, then he could do all those actions. He could grab her to pull her in and wrestle with her, whatever stuff. So that's the range at which he could do that. Okay, so he's only going to touch her shoulder. And what Maya's going to try to do is always get out of the way. So every time Josh tries to touch her shoulder, Maya's going to just do a slow one so we can see. Josh is going to move, right, there we go. So every time he moves his hand, Maya's going to try to move out of the way so we can see that. Okay, now Josh is going to go freely of his own accord whenever he wants to do it. So if he can detect some kind of rhythms or patterns Maya is in, or get her at a moment she's not expecting it, if he sees she kind of dozes off, then he's going to use that time to get her, right? So whenever he wants, he's going to come in and try and touch her. All right, good enough. Okay, now we could make lots of inferences from that, right? So we could say, well, Maya sucks at martial arts. So because she sucks at martial arts, then she needs to do more training because Josh got her every single time. If we took a large group of people and looked at them doing this, we would see that most people get hit at that range. Now, the reason is because this range is inherently dangerous. There is not a skill set you can train at this range to make you regularly successful. Now, that's not to say you can't sometimes get out of the way, but again, that's a roll of the dice. And remember, we're trying to look at trained skills, things that we can get better at. Now, the reason that it's so hard for Maya to get out of the range here is because two reasons. One, Josh's hand is significantly faster than Maya's foot. So when she's trying to take an action with her foot to counter Josh's action with his hands, then it's going to be inherently slow. So we're teaching the students something really true and visceral at this point, which is you can't move your feet as fast as someone can move their hands. Okay, now, we could, of course, add to this that Maya could block. So let's say Josh comes in to hit her and Maya blocks. Okay, now that's very reasonable. Maya can use her hand speed to match Josh's hand speed. However, the problem with this is Maya just doesn't have much reaction time in this. Now, if she trained a whole lot and maybe had a better reaction time than Josh has to make his action happen, she might be able to kind of get closer to 50-50 or so. But in truth, if this guy is at all close to her ability level, he'll always win because he is acting first. First person to act is generally going to win the situation. So we're teaching them something else really important, that reacting is slower than acting, right? And that's an important thing to understand. So two good things come out of this drill, and it's a very live drill. One is that your hand moves way faster than the foot. And two is that reaction time is slower than action time, right? So we learned that. All right, now, that being said, as Aikido students, we're not going to spend much time working at this range. And in fact, we're going to learn that we hate this range. The reason we hate this range is because it's unlikely that we're going to be successful at this range. This range is for different kinds of martial arts, right? So studying boxing for this kind of range, and arguably those guys are always trying to stay out of that range except for when they want to be in that range. Studying grappling is good for this kind of range, right? So other martial arts, which are very valid and good to study, there's nothing wrong with studying other martial arts, are better for this range than Aikido is. So now we got to figure out what an Aikido acceptable range is. All right, now we have the Aikido Ma'ai, and this is the classic Ma'ai that everyone learns. First day of Aikido class, you go into an Aikido school, and this is probably one of the very first lessons you learn. And again, we're going to have a game they play at this range, right? Which is they're both going to measure out this distance. Now, we're going to play the exact same game we did a second ago. Josh is going to try to hit Maya's shoulder, and Maya's going to try to get out of the way. As fast and as erratic as he wants to be, he can go. Okay? Now, we're already seeing something very different. Now, we could infer from that, Josh sucks. He needs to learn to hit faster and move faster and all that stuff. And of course, he could always get better at that. We could all get better at things. But something else, if we looked at a big group of people doing this, we would learn that generally, as long as the person receiving is attentive, they can get out of the way. Now, the reason they can get out of the way, again, is twofold. Because Josh can't just use his hand, he has to move his foot. Maya can move her foot as well, and that means they're going to be in equal time. So if Josh moves his foot and Maya moves her foot, they're in equal time. The second thing, and arguably more important, is that Maya has enough reaction time to deal with this situation, right? So she actually can cognitively figure out what's going on and deal with that before he can get to her. This gives you a fighting chance. Now, if we go beyond this range, we will just skew Maya's advantages more and more and more. And so it gets to where, if they're really far apart, she can definitely see what's coming way before it ever gets there, right? That is the first live training drill for Aiki that your students have to get. You have to inherently understand what Ma'ai is. Okay, now the second drill you need to work with the guys is what happens if the person can encroach on that distance, okay? Now this is not a live training drill at all, but it's a way to start slowly easing your students into something that's later going to become a very fast progression. As Josh is going to come in towards Maya with his hands extended, just like a Frankenstein or a zombie, and Maya is going to suppress the arm and get out of the way. All right, there we go. So real simple. Now, there are 6 ways in Aikido in which we can do this. So in this school, we use 6 Tai no Hinko, 6 body variations, position variations, and we can use all 6 of those. Now, 5 of those are outside moving, right? And so what we mean by that is, if we drew a line between them, 5 of those Tai no Hinko are going to move outside the line, and only 1 of those is going to move inside the line, so that one's special. So first we're just going to hit the 5 basic outside. Okay, so as Josh comes in towards Maya, Maya can practice a 45, She can practice an outside turn also. Okay, so Maya can practice a 45. Good. Maya can practice irimi. Good. Maya can practice a 90. Good. And Maya can practice a triangle. All right, so there's her 5 outside, right? So she has a 45, she has an outside turn, she has a triangle step, she has a 90, and she has irimi, right? So those 5 are our 5 outside steps she's going to use. Okay, now we have one inside step. Now this inside step, until you kind of understand how Aikido theory works, seems stupid because she's actually going to turn inside the line, and without an adaptation, and Josh, don't put your arms out, let's just show what that looks like. So this is an inside turn. Okay, that's an inside turn. Now if you look at that and go real slow so they can see that, so as Josh is coming in, Maya actually turns inside of Josh, turning her back towards Josh, and this seems like a crazy movement. Maya can adapt any of the outside Tai no Hinko to an inside Tai no Hinko. So let's say Maya just tries an outside turn, and Josh is wise to that, and he moves from a narrow attack to a wide attack as she does that. It would look like this. Right? Okay, so what happened was Maya's trying to suppress and get to the outside of the line, and Josh went around her suppression and made a wide attack like this so he could grither her up, right? So he can kind of get all around her like this. Now Maya can turn that into an inside turn. So watch now, she'll turn the outside turn into an inside turn. Watch how this happens. So as Josh is going around, Maya scoots underneath his arm, right? Now we can do that from an outside turn. We can also do that from irimi. We could also do that from a triangle. We could also do that from a 90. And we can also do that from a 45. All right, so this leads us to another drill that I like to run with people when we start learning how to make good Aiki. And this is, not great Aiki because, in fact, he's already crouched in the distance. He's gotten too close to her, so it's not great. But how can she make energetic actions that fit with what Josh is doing? And this is an adaptation drill. So as we're doing this, what we'll have him do is Josh will come at Maya, sometimes only staying narrow. And she should just use outside movements for that. We got 5 outside movements that should work for that. So every time he comes narrow, that's what she should do. He's going to randomly put in adaptations, so to go from narrow to wide. And when he does that, Maya needs to train herself to skate right around that action. Now what you want to do with your students is have them do this randomly, right? So after they can do both of those variations, they need to do it randomly. So this person gets used to, if they make successful outside movement, then it's just successful. But if there's adaptation, they start learning how to adapt to that adaptation. Let's run it a little bit more. All right, good. So understand we still have the training wheels on at this point. This is still super mellow practice, but we're getting our students used to moving in a way with each other that will train them for later, faster action, will help them move in those kinds of ways. All right, now, in this, Josh is doing a really simple practice to get around Maya's suppression. So let's just kind of fake it. So as Josh comes in and Maya gets suppression, there, all Josh has to do right now is move his arm around, and now he's in a wide position. He can get to Maya, right? But Josh could do all kinds of stuff. He could pull his arm out and shoot it back in real fast. He could shoot his other arm across. There's all kinds of ways in which he could try and grab Maya. So the next drill out, so let's have you guys separate again. The next drill out is going to be a suppression drill. And what this drill is designed to do is to teach Maya how to keep the best suppression possible. So now as Josh comes in, he's going to always try to get around her suppression and get Maya. And Maya is always going to try to keep Josh from getting her. So as Josh comes in, he tried to reach around really far that time. He stopped for a second and paused and grabbed. And he got her that one. All right, good. And that showed us something. All right, good. Okay, so that time he snuck out there and he got her shoulder. And Maya quickly used a Hadoki technique to get free, okay? Now, Hadoki will be in our kumiuchi series. We put some videos out on Hadoki so we can look that up. But I would recommend stacking those together. So when your students get grabbed and they didn't expect someone to get around their suppression, they quickly made Hadoki. And you can see Maya just instantly went into Hadoki and she got free. And that's what we should be training in Aikido. Okay, so that drill, what it's designed to do is to teach the Aikido student how to have an active and live suppression. So when Maya, and let's just kind of fake it here. So when Maya gets her hand on Josh's arm, let's have you go to the other side actually, there we go. So when Maya gets her hand on Josh's arm, understand Josh could do lots of stuff with his hand. He could go back, he could go up, he could go down, he could do all kinds of stuff. And Maya needs to learn to have active suppression with that, right? Okay, now the second part, what Josh was just showing right now, is Josh could reach from the other side. And so that's why Maya always has to be trying to move to the outside of this, right? And that deals with that. Now we see there, classic Ikkyo from Aikido. So why is Ikkyo Aikido's first lesson? Well, there it is, because it's our main suppression method, right? And Maya can use that to keep Josh away from her. All right, very good. So first, we're going to go through the basic Tai no Hinko. After they understand Ma'ai, we're going to go through the basic Tai no Hinko, and then we're going to go to an active suppression drill. Now, one thing we're going to try not to have Josh do there is stop. And the reason is because anytime someone stops in Aikido, an attacker stops, you should just make distance, right? So Maya doesn't want to play a game, so let's show this kind of game. So let's say Josh comes in for that, wait, hang on one second. Let's say Josh comes in for the active suppression drill, and he stops to catch Maya and plays the game. Maya could dance with him like this. Okay, that's stupid, it's bad, it's horrible Aikido, because if you notice, they were in the range that we talked about earlier was bad for Aikido. So Maya, knowing that that range is bad for Aikido, should tell Maya that every time they do that, she should do this, in fact. All right, so now you see that end up we're going to have the same thing we just had a second ago before Josh stopped, is Josh going to have to run to get Maya because Maya's making distance. So that's the way that's dealt with in this practice. If the attacker wants to stop and play this game, then the defender should just walk away from them. And then that will force the attacker to chase them, and again we'll have up the exact situation that we just set up right now. So with your guys, when you see that going on too much, you can explain that to them, and you can say, hey guys, we're not running all around the mat right now, we're practicing it in a straight line because we still have the training wheels on, right? So this is still, we're still baby stepping it here. Okay, so that's how you deal with those problems that are going to come up in your live practice. I will warn you now, they will come up quite often. All right, so the next drill we're going to work from this is going to require a weapon. All right, so now we got a pool noodle of doom. All right, so actually because we're having Maya do the Aiki, we're going to go ahead and switch this. All right, so one of the other lessons in Aikido is at a certain point so much force has been brought that there's no way you can escape not using a weapon, because you have to have some force of your own to counter the amazing force that this person's bringing. And that could be just because they're physically so much greater than you, right? So if you're fighting a pro MMA fighter, you're going to need a weapon in your hand. If you're not a pro MMA fighter, there's no way you're going to deal with that guy without a weapon in your hand. So let's just pretend Josh is a pro MMA fighter. The only way Maya's possibly going to deal with Josh is to have a weapon, right? So we need to train those skills. Now, a really unobviously difficult thing is moving and using a weapon at the same time, right? So you might think, oh, well, of course, I'll just zig and zag and hit people with weapons. It'll be so sweet. You won't do that until you train it a lot. You will suck at it. We all have many times, because it's difficult to think of how to get away and how to hit someone at the same time. It's a real skill that has to be trained. Maya is going to do the basic drill we did before, but she's going to use the weapon as she does that. So as Josh comes in, she's going to get suppression, Tai no Hinko, and use the weapon. Okay. Now notice there she used the weapon for the suppression. Acceptable. There she used her hand for suppression and attacked with the weapon. Acceptable. So this is just the same drill, except we're forcing Maya to start to learn how to use a weapon while she's making suppression and Tai no Hinko. So this is another skill she's going to use. Okay, now then again, of course, we can add to this Josh trying to get around her suppression and Maya using a defense. Good. Okay, so with that, we can see that Josh is trying to come in. He's trying to get around her suppression. She's trying to hit. Now again, if you get your students doing the little dance thing, you should just be telling the Nage that their objective is to get away from the dance thing, right? So, okay, so if Josh comes in towards Maya and he stops to do the little dance, okay, and then Maya plays the dance and she starts popping him with the stick, right? So, okay, that's not the game of Aikido, right? So Maya should already know that that range is bad for her, because we learned that in those early Ma'ai drills. So Maya doesn't want to be at that range. She wants the most range because she has the most Aiki potential with that. So if Josh plays the dance game, then that's what Maya should do. She should go away. Now, of course, the second Maya walks away, if Josh wants to get her, he'll have to chase her. And again, we're at this basic setup for this drill. So doing that little dance game is just a way not to practice the thing that we're practicing right now. Now, later, we can open it up, and we will in just a second here with Randori, and we can let them do whatever they want. And then it will be a completely free practice, and we'll see how the dance game plays out for Josh. But in this drill, you need to keep your students really, really honest with this. All right, so now from this, we should be able to judge good distance for our students. We should be able to make suppression and tai no hinko for our students. We should be able to use a weapon making tai no hinko and suppression for our students. And so now that's going to bring us to Randori. Okay, so I'm going to get out of here in a second. We're going to let these guys go. But we'll set up a box, and the box is the parameters Maya has to be in, right? So that's it's totally artificial, but it represents her being in a room or in a situation where there's dangerous things on the edges, right? So maybe there's a cliff or a road or a pool or a whatever, stuff she doesn't want to get in. So Maya's got to manage the distance so she doesn't get knocked out of bounds. And she has to keep her stick while she's doing that to use it on Josh. Josh isn't going to feign that he's getting hurt because that's not the objective of this. All we're training Maya to do is use her weapon while she's moving. Now Josh, of course, his win criteria in this is going to be he takes the weapon away from her or she drops it. Even if she drops it on her own, that's a win criteria for Josh. He pushes her out of bounds. That's a win criteria for Josh. He knocks her down, so anything other than her feet are on the ground, that's a win criteria for Josh because Aikido doesn't train that stuff, right? So we should get up from there, right? So that's a win criteria for Josh. The only way Maya wins is to survive the whole time, okay? We're going to run these in 10-second intervals right now, and 10 seconds is, I wouldn't go any longer for your students than 10 seconds in the beginning. 10 seconds is a lot. And the amount of damage this guy would usually acquire in 10 seconds will be significant because remember, she's using a weapon the whole time. So if it was a pistol, she'd be putting rounds on target. If it's a stick, she's whacking him. If it's a knife, she's cutting him. So that's 10 seconds is a lot of time for him to sustain continuous injury. All right, guys, so that was the drills I would recommend beginning your students off working with Aiki live training. So most of those practices, or a lot of those practices, aren't actually live practices, but you're going to need to do them to build up to the Randori we had at the end. So that's the way we do Randori. We would generally do it with 2 attackers, although just to make things easy, and we did it with just the 2 today, 2 people total, instead of having 3 total, which 2 attackers and 1 nage. So we did it that way just so it was easier to see and consistent with what we did. But generally, when you get into Randori, you need to start doing multiple attackers. There's another set of drills that you need to work on for multiple attackers. We'll make a video. We've kind of made some videos in the past, but we'll make some more videos for you guys talking about multiple attacker Randori and how you start to work that. But you can see in there what's trying to happen. Now understand that when Maya's in the Randori situation, that is not ideal Aikido. That's right before failing Aikido. So she doesn't want to be there. She doesn't want to have to use a weapon. She doesn't want to be having to move around real fast with a guy like that. It's dangerous. And the more skilled Josh is, the less likely she is going to be able to deal with that. So honestly, good Aiki would be never being in that situation. But that's right before it's going to turn into serious kumiuchi. So once Josh gets a hold of her, then we're already into kumiuchi range. And this is about Aiki. So that progression will build your students up. So remember, first work on Ma'ai. They have to understand Ma'ai and what's a good distance for Aikido and what's a bad distance for Aikido. If you understand what a good distance for Aikido is, that will fix a lot of the problems your students are going to have because they'll automatically always be resetting to the good distance, right? The good distance is just really far away. That's the best distance you can have. But that minimum fingertip distance, that's the last distance you can possibly do reasonable Aiki. Then after they can judge that distance really well, you can have them work with tai no hinko and suppression. So how do you suppress the arm and get off the line? That's going to be really key. Then how do you adapt to what they're going to do? So when you suppress their arm, they're not just going to be like a zombie or a Frankenstein and keep their arms out. They're going to move their arms around to try and get you. So you have to have an adaptive drill, and it's a pretty live drill now because the person's actually trying to come around and get you. Still, there's a lot of things, though, that are off the table in that, and I explain the reasons why, because stopping wouldn't be working on that skill set. When we get into Randori, Josh could do whatever he wanted. Now, understand, in that Randori, Josh just attacked because he has 10 seconds to try and get Maya, so he's explosively attacking. And that's also the mindset of someone who's just furious and they're coming at you to get you, right? So there's not a well planned out game there. There's just Josh wanting to get Maya as fast as possible. And that's just like a violent attack where someone's trying to get you. Now, if you have ninjas who are plotting to get you all the time, you need other training other than you're going to get in a regular dojo. This is for a situation where someone just got violently all of a sudden and they want to attack you, and how do you deal with that? So that's what we envision as a real life scenario. You know, you're talking to someone and everything seemed cool, and then all of a sudden they freak out and they attack you. How do you deal with that situation? Now, that Maya was really inhibited. I wouldn't start off with a box this small for you guys, right? So this is a really advanced box. This box is about 10 feet by 8 feet, so that's a tiny room. That's like a little bitty bedroom, right? So if you're in that kind of room and someone starts to get hostile, you should just automatically know to get out of the room because it's going to be hard to keep your distance. So if you can deal with that for 10 seconds, you're pretty skilled, right? So you're buying yourself a lot of time in a really compromised situation. So we usually start off with the box being somewhere around 20 by 20, and that's a good, it's still super challenging at that speed. If I'm working with brand new students, sometimes I'll give them the whole mat, and our mat's like 40-something feet by 30-something feet, so it's a pretty big mat. So I'll let them use the whole mat, right, to get used to that. But as the students become more and more skilled at it, you want to give them tinier and tinier areas, so that way they have to learn good Taino Hinko, good suppression, and make all that work for them. So that's the progression we use. That's what we would call Randori, what you just saw there at the end. We usually do it with 2 attackers instead of 1, but that's what we call Randori. And that's our skill set to build up to live training with Aiki. And Aikido being about Aiki, that's the main objective we want to practice. All right, thanks a lot for watching. I'm Christopher Hein.